Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Someone's got energy this morning. We are going to start a little bit ahead of schedule because I've been told that Senator Brown is on his way and will be joining us in just a few minutes. So if everyone could take your seats, we'll get started. Thank you. I'm Lauren Pescatori, and I'm the Director of Tax Credits for Workers and Their Families, or TCWF. We are a nonpartisan communications initiative that works to promote tax credits for low-income people, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit and Child Tax Credit. And we do so by working with policymakers and advocates at the state and federal levels to develop communication strategies and materials that help raise awareness of and build support for these credits. We are thrilled to be partnering with Prosperity Now today to bring you this event on what's ahead for the EITC and other anti-poverty programs as the new Congress begins. And we have a jam-packed event ahead of us today. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day. Since 2004, Andrea Levere has been the president of Prosperity Now, a nonprofit organization with the mission of ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to gain financial stability, build wealth, and achieve prosperity. Under Andrea's leadership, Prosperity Now designs and operates major national initiatives that aim to integrate financial capability services into systems serving low-income people, build assets and savings, and advance research and policies that expand economic mobility for all. In 2017, Andrea was appointed to the Community Advisory Council of the Federal Reserve System, and after serving as vice chair in 2018, she will become council chair this year. She has also been chair of Resident-Owned Communities USA and is a member of the FDIC's Committee on Economic Inclusion and Morgan Stanley's Community Development Advisory Board. You can learn more about Andrea, Prosperity Now, TCWF, and all of our fantastic panelists in the folders provided for you. And now, to kick off today's event, please join me in welcoming Andrea Levere, Prosperity Now president, to the podium.
Thank you, Lauren, and thanks all of you for joining us at this very important event today. You always know that people are really excited when the room is almost filled 15 minutes before you have to start. I think that was a record, so thank you all for joining us. I just want to do a special note. You also feel an incredible sense of pride when the person who introduces you is a dear friend of your daughter's. So with that, I want to say to see the generations continuing this work is such a great thrill for me. So thank you so much, Lauren. So I want to welcome you all to this event, which is what's next for the Earned Income Tax Credit and how we strengthen the tax code for working families. This is an issue that in these days we find to be an issue that bridges virtually every community in the United States. And we have extraordinary leadership in the Senate and the House, seeing how we can expand access to tax credits that truly transform people's financial lives in this country. So to get to this place today, it took many people working together, and I want to begin by thanking them. First, thanks again to Lauren and her team at Tax Credits for Workers and Their Families. I also want to give a special thank you to H&R Block, who's been our key sponsor for this event every year and is beginning to engage even more deeply in this work. We are very grateful for your partnership. And then I want to thank our extraordinary group of panelists who are joining us today. Betty Habersham from the Prince George's Cash Campaign, and I heard from her briefly that that cash campaign is ramping up, as we all know, so I really want to thank her for taking part today. Samuel Hammond from the Niskanen Institute and Center, and I want to thank him for sharing all his work on economic opportunity with us. Elaine Mogg from Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, which is one of the leading tax policy centers, I think, in the world. And Daniel Turntine from H&R Block, who will also be sharing their very important work. So we also have two extraordinary keynote speakers this morning who are going to share their visions on the tax code, as well as the opportunity and challenges for working families in 2019. They are champions who are dedicated to making the tax code work for all families, not just those who are at the top. And we are happy, and we will be welcoming Senator Brown from Ohio very shortly, and Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman from the 12th District of New Jersey. So why are we here? We are here with an intense focus on discussing the tax time challenges that impact working families. Many of you, I hope all of you, have spent time with the 2019 Prosperity Now scorecard, which we view as the most comprehensive benchmarking tool available for looking at the financial health, state of racial economic inequality, and policy recommendations that can help put everyone on the path for prosperity. In the scorecard, you will see that 2 out of every 5 households are in a state of liquid asset poverty, which is a nerdy term that really we use to capture the state of financial insecurity in this country. And it basically measures the ability of a household to live at the poverty level for just 3 months if their main source of income is disrupted. I have to say that the resonance of the scorecard gained enormous impact with the government shutdown. And we heard some extraordinarily insightful comments from some of our leading national officials of why do people have to go to food banks if they're not getting their paychecks. And it's been an opportunity for us to really focus in on the real issue of today, that while income poverty has been an extraordinarily important focus for us, the level of financial security is a much broader definition when it looks to what are the solutions that we need to bring to the table. So one of those huge solutions, as you all know, because you're all dedicated to this, is tax refunds. We know that tax refunds can make up 30% of a low-income family's annual income, and a big reason for that is the Earned Income Tax Credit. Since 1975, the EITC has been one of the most powerful anti-poverty tools in our country. Because it is a fully refundable credit that puts money back into the hands of hardworking taxpayers, it's often the largest amount of cash that a household sees during the entire year. It is a critical income support that helps hardworking Americans overcome financial challenges while they're also fulfilling their responsibilities as taxpayers in our economy. And tax time is key to helping them secure these credits. However, but with resource constraints at the IRS, and I know none of you are familiar with those, the first year filing under the new tax law and the partial government shutdown, our working families are facing a number of challenges in these first weeks of the tax season. And I want everybody who's helping folks to file their taxes to raise their hands so we can give them a round of applause while we're starting. Thank you. But there are many opportunities, and many of you are working on this, to improve tax policy and tax administration. One of the issues that I am personally most excited about is the Refund to Rainy Day Savings Act, which will allow workers to save for those emergencies. This act allows households to opt into deferring 20% of their tax refund into a Treasury account that would then gain interest. This would be directly deposited into their account 6 months later. And the bill will also establish a 3-year pilot program that would evaluate the use of matching funds to incentivize families to save. This bill was prepared in a partnership with Kathy Eden, whose book, It's Not Like I'm Poor, chronicled exactly the flow of tax credits into the household and the need to help stabilize families 6 months in so they didn't go cash flow negative and then ended up with the payday lenders or worse. So with that news, I think I'm getting the signal that one of our speakers is just arriving. So let me begin while he's here to introduce, is he coming? This is so exciting. It's like the pageant. There are 4 people at the door. There are 5 people. So I think I can start introducing him now. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. The senator has been a champion. You can come up through the middle of middle-class families in the Senate. He's committed to both social and economic justice and serves as the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, where he played an instrumental role in passing the historic Wall Street reform law. He also serves on the Senate Finance Committee, and there has made sure that important expansions of the Earned Income Tax Credit became permanent in 2015, and has been a tireless advocate for EITC's expansion to childless workers. His GAIN, Grow American Incomes Now Act, would double or triple the EITC's benefits, depending on family size, and increase the maximum income for families to receive the credit, lifting 2.5 million children out of poverty. He has also been a champion of VITA, sponsoring the VITA Permanence Act and pushing for increased funding. His American Family Act, co-sponsored with Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, would expand the child tax credit, increasing the amount families could receive, distributing the credit in advance to households, paying out the credit to families each month, and making it more progressive so that the credit would help our most important households the month. So with that, please join me in welcoming Senator Brown.
Thank you, everybody. I love the way this crowd looks. I love the diversity. It's looking almost like the House floor is starting to look. So, I've been to a lot of State of the Unions, and I guess the plural is states of the Union. State. I don't know where the S goes, but I've been to a lot of them, and they're a little different with this president. But the high moment 2 nights ago was when all these women, freshmen, mostly freshmen, dressed in white, and when Trump said, 58% of the new jobs are being created or being held by women, and like 30 of them stood up, and yeah, we're 30 of them, and then started chanting USA. It was a great moment. So thank you. As the face of this country changes, and first of all, thank you for doing God's work. I mean, what you're doing is so important. I just mentioned to a group, there were a group of African American nurses that just stopped from Cleveland. And we were talking about the dignity of work and how important work is to our society and how we organize around work. And I cited my favorite Dr. King quote. You know that Dr. King was martyred fighting for low-income workers, perhaps the most exploited, next to farm workers, the most exploited workers in America, sanitation workers in the South, in Memphis. And he had a quote, he didn't say it at this speech, but he had a quote that goes something like this, if I can recall it. He said, if God calls you to be a street sweeper, sweep streets the way that Michelangelo painted, in the way that Beethoven wrote music, in the way that Shakespeare composed verse, then the heavens will open and God will say, there goes a good street sweeper. And just to think about too many people, you look at what happened during the shutdown, the people that are invisible, the people that you're advocating for, whether they're working for paid low wages or whether they're at home raising children or caring for an aging parent and not actually getting a paycheck. But the people that is stupid as the shutdown, when the commander-in-chief proudly shuts the government down, as stupid as that was, the people that were hurt the most, again, were those who are least visible. They were the contract workers. They prepare our food. They keep our offices and federal facilities clean, and they provide security to keep both the visiting public and federal employees safe. And when we do back pay for those 800,000 furloughed and non-furloughed workers who are working without pay, we do the back pay. This Congress doesn't think about doing the pay for those hundreds of thousands of workers. What does that mean? You know what it means. It means they don't get paid for 5 weeks. It means they go to payday lenders, and you know the downward spiral. I mean, you read the downward spiral if you read Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, and you know what happens to people that live on the edge when nobody looks out for them and they get a little push over that edge. and their lives are upside down for so long. And that's why the work you are doing is so important here. So thank you as you fight alongside us. You know, the fight, we in some sense, unbelievably, we win some of these fights here. We win even though, you know, the people that work here, way more than not, particularly the Republican majority, but some people on our side too, they're looking out for people that don't really need help the way that so many hardworking Americans and so many people are struggling with kids. In 2015, we successfully permanently expanded the EITC. It gave millions of Americans a bridge to a more prosperous life. And we started out with virtually no support except for all of you and people that were agitating around the country. We passed the bill ultimately in the Senate because we organized and said we will do nothing to help corporations until we get earned income tax credit expanded and permanent. And Republicans resisted, some Democrats resisted, but by the time everything started to move on the Senate floor, we had every single Democrat but one saying no corporate tax cuts, no corporate anything until we get the earned income tax credit. And not unexpectedly, we did that in the Senate, not unexpectedly in the House. The hero is Nancy Pelosi. Not unexpectedly at all, frankly. Why I love her for other reasons too. Having nothing to do with her president's wave, handshake, whatever that weird thing that happened. Yeah, something. I never really even knew what that meant. But you can all do it now, can't you? But she took it in the House. We got the President of the United States, President Obama, to threaten a veto, and that put us in a place with Nancy's work and our work in the Senate to do that. So it really is about organizing. It really is about using the leverage of you speak for a lot of people in. Forget this town. You speak for a lot of people around the country when you fight for this. Our work's clearly not done. This month, I'm reintroducing a bill working with Senator Bennett from Colorado, who's a hero in this, to double the EITC to make 20 million more people eligible for earned income tax credit. Only 50 million people would get money back in their pockets. One thing we're doing that nobody much thinks about, and this is an important component but doesn't look as important, and that is if it's October and your car breaks down and you need to get to work and you don't have $400, so you have to go to a payday lender, and you know what happens then. So if it's October and you've already earned most of your income tax, say you were going to get a refundable tax credit that year of $3,000. If it's October, you've already earned $2,000 of that $3,000. You would be able, under the provisions that we're putting in this, to advance up to $500 only once. We don't want people starting to take it out. Then they don't get the bump in March or April or May when they do their taxes. But they can get a $500 advance. It's taken out from them next year, but they can get a $500 advance if they have a reason they decide they want to do it. And it can save them from going to a payday lender and all that happens that way. So for most people in this town that dress this way, except they don't wear union suits made in Cleveland, but for most people in this town, I thought I'd throw that in. Thanks for laughing. The rest of them it passed over their head. These are smart people, but never mind. Those kinds of things, we need to be creative. We need to come up with ideas like that. We did something, my staff came up with this idea during the Hurricane Katrina, the more recent one in Texas. Yeah, Maria. The hurricane was fairly early in the year, if I recall, and people, their jobs were literally washed away. I mean, they didn't have a job then. So we were able to get a provision in the money package for hurricane survivors in those communities that they could claim their earned income tax credit from the year before. They had not earned much of an earned income tax credit that year because their job was washed away. So we got a provision. I got the Texas Republican leader, second guy in command of the Senate, to agree to it, to put it so that people could look at their year before EITC refund and get that. And it put a couple $1,000s into people's pockets who were overwhelmed with tragedy, lost their house, lost their job, lost their possessions, all that. But there are things like that we need to be creative as we think about earning tax credit and think about what we're doing now. The other thing we really want to, with this Bennett-Brown bill, we really want to make sure that we do a couple of other things that this tax system still taxes young single people into poverty. You can get the earning tax credit when you're single if you're 24, but you can't when you're 21. What does that mean? It means that you work, it means you're taxed into poverty because you're still paying the payroll tax. You're paying the percent you pay in the payroll tax. And so whatever you're making, you're not getting any help with the EITC, but so in some sense, the government taxes you back into poverty. So we want to lower the age to 21 so single people can be eligible. Won't be as much as if you have 2 kids, of course, but it's significant in the life of a young man or a young woman that age. And the other thing we want to do, and if we really do believe work has dignity, everybody works. It's not just congressmen, it's not just leaders and activists, it's not just people that work at the sanitation department. It's people raising kids and people cobbling things together and taking care of foster kids and their parents or whatever they're doing. And we want to make sure that everybody who has children can get a much more generous child tax credit and make more people. Because it really, there are 2 books that speak to this to me. One is Matthew Desmond's Evicted. The other is a book called $2 a Day. And written, I know both of them. Catherine Eden and what's the guy's name? I know them both, but I'm sorry. But Catherine Eden is the older of the 2 and the young. Yeah, Luke Schaefer, of course, yeah. And both those books are worth reading because what it shows to me when I think about these people that living literally on $2 a day, they are the most entrepreneurial, resourceful human beings I've ever met. I mean, they're people that figure out how to live on almost no income. They talked about a woman in Mississippi in the Delta. And she had a freezer. A lot of people didn't have refrigerators and freezers in the poorest parts of the Delta. And she'd go out and she would make popsicles in her freezer and sell them for like $1. And it's the few dollars. She had a little bit of a disability check. It's how she lived. And in the Delta, it's pretty hot, and she figured that would work for a lot of neighbor kids and all. And these were some of the most, when you read that book, $2 a Day, it just shows the resourcefulness. And one of the people they talked about was a woman in suburb of Cleveland, and just everything kind of went wrong in her life, and how she fought back and how she made it happen. So my only admonition to you is as you sort of explore this and think about the dignity of work and think about giving people a starting chance in life, as this society so ignores the people that work in airports that push wheelchairs and work for sub-minimum wage and have to live on tips, to the federal workers that really got screwed on, all of them did, but those most acutely, to all the other people that this society, as corporate profits go up and executive compensation soars and workers work hard, they don't share in the wealth they create for their bosses. This is a time when we really can fight back, but you're organizing and putting the pressure, especially on Republican House and Senate members. Put it on Democrats too. All the Democrats aren't great on this either, but they're more perhaps open, but we need your pressure on the Mitch McConnells of the world and on all of us to continue to fight. So I'll close with one of my favorite stories. John Lewis, former congressman from Atlanta, who was beaten up in the civil rights movement more than any other human being. He was 23, the youngest person to speak at the March on Washington down the street in 1963. And John's now in his close to 80, member of Congress, and he and I and another senator led the reenactment of the March on Selma in 2015, 50th anniversary. We flew down, and President Obama joined us in a much nicer plane a little later, and our plane was okay, but it wasn't that plane. And anyway, so John told me a story. John had been the speaker at Ole Miss's graduation, and for John Lewis, civil rights activist, beaten up by Southern sheriffs and deputies and guardsmen and all, to have been invited to speak at Ole Miss's graduation is a story in itself. But here's the story he told. John was born in 1940. This was in the mid-50s. He was a kid on a chicken farm outside Troy, Alabama, and he tells a story that he and his parents went into town on a bus. They were subsistence farmers mostly. He grew up with clearly loving parents that understood education, but had not much of material things. Went into the bus station, 1955 or 6, and John saw these signs in the bus station. It said, whites only restroom, whites only bathroom, colored only bathroom. And he said, Mom, Dad, what does that mean, whites only? His parents said, John, don't ask questions, don't make trouble. He then said, well, that's not good enough. And he saw the waiting rooms, and it said white waiting room, colored waiting room. And he said to his grandparents, Grandpa, what does that mean? He said, John, don't ask questions, don't make trouble. So as John tells the story, 2 years later, he went off to college and he met a woman named Rosa Parks. And then the next year, he met a man by the name of Martin Luther King. And John was then 17, 18 years old. And he told them that story. And both Parks and King said, John, no, that's not right. Make trouble, ask questions, make trouble, make good necessary trouble. So that's what we count on all of you to do, to fight back. Thanks so much.
So one more round of applause for Senator Brown. And I just want to raise up how with the new legislation he talked about, the issue of income volatility, which you know intersects with financial insecurity and is transforming the financial lives of so many of the people we care most about, is being addressed in this legislation, which is huge. So with that, it is my extraordinary pleasure to introduce Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman from New Jersey's 12th District. Representative Coleman, a long-time and influential advocate for the people of New Jersey, is currently serving her third term in the U.S. Congress. Representative Watson Coleman shattered racial and gender barriers to become the first Black woman to serve as Majority Leader of the New Jersey General Assembly and as the chair of the New Jersey Democratic State Committee. Her election to the House of Representatives makes her the first Black woman to represent New Jersey in Congress. And all I can say is it's about time. As a member of the 116th Congress, Representative Watson Coleman is serving as the only New Jersey delegate on the House Appropriations Committee and is also on the Homeland Security Committee. She is the lead sponsor of the EITC Modernization Act of 2018, which would expand EITC eligibility to those enrolled in higher education or working the equivalent of a part-time job for a family member. It would set a minimum baseline EITC payment for students and caregivers of $100 a month, create an option for EITC recipients to receive their benefits monthly, again, back to the income volatility issue we discussed, and put VITA into law. Please join me in welcoming the Congresswoman.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am telling you that I am very proud to be here with you, and I thank you for the good work that you're doing and your willingness to be a voice and to be a force for change. You know, at the end of the day, all we're talking about is having enough money in the hands of families and individuals that it stretches for 31 days, not that on the 10th day you're trying to figure out how you're going to get through the next 20 days. Thank God that there are a lot of members on both in both houses that are working on pieces of legislation. They're trying to figure out how do we get more money in the hands of people, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. I know you've been sort of briefed on the fact that I am the sponsor of the EITC Modernization Act. And just simply put, it's just an important change, but a minor change to the tax code, allowing caregivers and full-time emancipated higher education students an opportunity to receive the Earned Income Tax Credit. My reason for wanting to do this and to bring this bill to Congress was just simply working families are no longer making ends work. They work 2 jobs and they're still not making ends work. That's unfair, that's un-American. Wage growth for most workers has been stagnant while cost of living has gone up. Debt, particularly student loan, has become a crushing burden for young families. The ability to save is non-existent, and it's not just for those people at the lowest end. Sometimes I have a problem trying to put a little aside for a rainy day. And it means that medical emergencies or just small crisis, something happening to your car, just a flooded apartment, anything, can quite literally send people over the edge. So as the Democratic House gets to work in our committees and on the floor, one of the questions that we're starting to ask ourselves is, how do we make daily life better for those who are just regular people like us? How do we make sure that paychecks make it from the 1st to the 31st of the month? The fact of the matter is that the EITC is a battle-tested method. And we know that when we expanded EITC, poverty decreased, health of infants and mothers who received EITC increases improved, and some research even suggested that educational outcomes improved as well. Unlike trickle-down and corporate giveaways, we know them, we have seen the EITC work in the real world. Expanding it to more individuals and increasing the amount which my colleague Ro Kahana has led is a logical, rational, and reasonable way to help narrow this divide. There are other opportunities to reform that the EITC Modernization Act addresses, including improving access to VITA and providing the option to make this credit monthly rather than an easily overspent lump sum. These are just simple adjustments that will make waves in the day-to-day financial stability of working families. But what I like most about the bill is the way it fundamentally improves the economic security of caregivers and students. Caregivers, who are primarily women, provide roughly $3.2 trillion in unpaid care in the United States in 2012. A recent study by the National Alliance for Caregiving and from AARP found nearly 40 million Americans are providing unpaid care, with another 5 million caregivers expected to be added by 2020 as the U.S. begins to confront an aging population. And I know something personally about this, except that I was very fortunate in that I made a decision to retire from state government, the executive branch of state government, only to find out 3 months later that my father was diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma, and he needed someone to take care of him all the time. I remember saying to him, wow, isn't that a blessing that I was able to retire, not knowing that I would be needed in this capacity, but being able to be here for you. And I was able, because of my situation, which was very fortunate, to take care of my father. I wasn't paid for it, but thank God I did have a source of income in my retirement. And then after my dad passed, I got elected to the state assembly, and I was there for a number of years. And my aunt became very ill, and she needed to be taken care of. And I had the flexibility in my life to be there every day that she needed me. And so while I, again, wasn't paid to take care of her, I was one of the fortunate ones that had a source of income that could certainly help get through what she needed in order to be able to live her life through. And that was very important to me. That was absolutely a blessing to me. And we should all have that option if necessary. So, and 61% of the individuals that report making changes, such as cutting back on their working hours, taking a leave of absence, or having to stop work entirely because of their need to take care of others, contributes to this higher rate of financial instability. But students on the other side of the equation often struggle with real-time costs and future debt of the education they need to achieve their dreams. Roughly 3 million students eligible for Pell Grants in roughly 2016 to 2017, more than 30% of them whom have dependents would be eligible to receive EITC benefits under this bill. In 2017, Republicans passed a tax bill that did a lot for corporations and very wealthy shareholders and high-paid CEOs. As many people are going to discover on this year's returns, however, it did nothing for regular Americans. But there's so much opportunity in the tax code to do that. Senator Booker, my senator, introduce introduce the American Opportunity Accounts Act, which would create a seed savings account for every child. And Senator Harris has introduced the LIFT Act, which would create a whole new tax credit program. These are all opportunities here and elsewhere, things like corporate profit sharing, something that I've introduced in legislation, which would guarantee or preclude companies that have $25 million or more profits from tax deductions on their bonuses unless they're willing to profit share with their employees. Also, there's a bill that Senator Booker and I are both signed on to, which was a jobs guarantee program. You know, we need to be creative in how we figure out how we make people more secure financially. We need to not overthink it, and we need to not overly bureaucratize it. There are wonderful experimental programs taking place, pilot programs. Chris Hughes is working in that space. How to get money in the hands of individuals without strings attached to them, to see how that improves their quality of life and their ability to survive the 31 days or the 30 days or the 29 days or the 28 days of each and every month. At the end of the day, our bottom line should be one that everyone can live with. And so we need to be thinking very creatively in this Congress and in the House, which so happens to be under majority Democratic control now. We need to be willing to think outside of the box, not get caught up in one of the president's isms that he talks about, but to figure out what is it that our everyday working, hardworking, desirous of having a good family outcome for their families, what do they need? And what is our responsibility to try to deliver it? This is work that we're willing to take on boldly now, I think. This is work that we need pressure from the outside so that people think that we're not only the little sort of lefties trying to figure this out on the inside, but indeed everyday working families and those who represent their interests are going to push us until we come up with some solutions that work for all families. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you for being willing to work in this space. Don't give up, don't give in, don't get depressed, and don't get stunted, but stand up because you know what? Very soon change is going to come. Thank you.
So you heard it here first. Rather than being lefties, we should all be tax nerds, and that will win the day. So I want to say that these two keynote speakers have given us extraordinary hope with innovative legislation that aims to do what all of us collectively have been working on for many, many years. In addition to the GAIN Act and the EITC Modernization Act and the refund to rainy day savings, there's one other thing that we all must do, and that focuses on making the VITA program permanent and funding it at closer to the level that it should be funded for the extraordinary contributions it makes to American households and to the economy. As you know, there are over 3,700 VITA sites around the country that help families earning $54,000 or less. Thanks in part to the Taxpayer Opportunity Network, which is now more than 3,000 members strong, these VITA volunteers returned over $1.8 billion in refunds last year, and in a point which I constantly raise with my colleagues, with the highest accuracy rate at 93% of any other type of preparer. So as we celebrate VITA's 50th anniversary this year, And you may know that we invented a holiday several years ago. We decided that we didn't have to legislate a holiday. We were just going to invent a holiday for VITA. So, and we did, and everybody played along, which was a wonderful thing. We love holidays. So it's a special birthday anniversary this year. It is our moment to double the funding for VITA and make it permanent after 40 years. With funding at $30 million, the VITA program could hire new staff, add new sites, improve volunteer recruitment, and increase outreach to low-income households. The bipartisan VITA Permanence Act would authorize the VITA program permanently and provide the grant funding that enables us to increase and expand the incredibly impressive work. And finally, before I introduce our panel, we're thrilled to share our new partnership with H&R Block to examine the role of financial products and services in the lives of low and moderate income taxpayers at tax time. And you'll hear more about this with our panel discussion. So now it's my thrill to ask David Newville to come up to invite our panel to share their perspectives on all the opportunities, challenges, and innovations in how we leverage the tax code to build financial security in this country. Take it away, David.
Thank you, Andrea. And I invite all the other panelists to come up and join at this time. It's exciting to see such a great crowd here to talk about taxes this morning. We've had some great framing remarks this morning by Andrea and by our congressional speakers. So we're going to kind of jump straight into our topics for the day, and we're going to cover a pretty wide variety. We have a pretty excellent group of experts here in the tax space in policy, administration, and practice from all different perspectives. So we'll jump straight in. I'll do some brief introductions. For more detailed bios in the packets that you have, there'll be more background on all of our speakers. But we're going to try to cover as much ground as we can in a general discussion, and then we'll open it up so you all have a chance to ask some questions as well at the end. So I will start introductions myself. As Andrea mentioned, I'm David Newville. I'm Director of Federal Policy at Prosperity Now, and I'll start with introductions closest to me and going down. So we have Betty Habershorn, with the Director of the Prince George's Cash Campaign, one of our leaders in VITA here locally, to join us today. An old friend of Prosperity Now, Sam Hammond, who's with the Niskanen Center, the Director of Poverty and Welfare Policy. Elaine Mogg, who's with the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, the authority on tax policy, one of the authorities of tax policy in DC. And then Daniel Turrentine, who's with H&R Block, who's brings on the government affairs and research side to kind of talk about their work as well. So we heard a lot of references to this tax season. We heard a lot of references as we heard about families struggling. Andrea highlighted our scorecard data. You know, on the surface, the data seems great, right? Low unemployment, the economy seems pretty good. But when you dig deeper, when you look at families' lives, you look at their wages, you look at savings, rent, healthcare, you're not seeing such a bright picture. Add on top of that, as we've already heard this morning, the shutdown, struggles in tax administration with the IRS even before that, a new tax law and the complexities that come with that. Let's start out the panel. I'm going to turn to Betty and Dan, who are on the ground more and dealing directly with taxpayers, to give us a sense. We're almost 2 weeks in to tax season. And as a reminder, as we've heard this morning too, despite these struggles, tax time is a major opportunity for low-income families. It's a really bright spot for them typically, where they can receive a substantial amount of their income for the year. It really can help boost them and get them through. Given all these factors, what is it? It's early, but what are you all seeing so far on the ground with families in these first 2 weeks? I think it should be on.
Yeah. Well, I'm Betty Habershon, and not only am I the director of Prince George's Cash, which is a coalition of organizations that support and encourage financial empowerment through expanding free tax preparation, financial education, and banking and saving, I also run a VITA site at Prince George's Community College. And we have seen, without our initial marketing, our people are already coming to the door. They're very concerned with the tax law because they don't have financial advisors. They don't have financial planners. They don't have people that are sending them nice newsletters each month telling them what to do and how this is going to affect them. So they really are concerned. And they are not all being supported across the board with the new tax changes. It depends on what positions they are. If they've had multiple children that in the past they had significant exemption benefit from, and that has been lost, even though some other things have been increased. But when you hit that ultimate limit of having a lot of children or a lot of dependents, it's hurting them. And they don't know what to do, and they need a safe place. And that's why our VITA program is just so important, because it's a safe place. It's a place where they not only get good quality tax preparation that they have depended on year after year, we also can connect them to those other services that will help them make the most out of those refunds that they receive.
Yeah, I would just echo some of what you've said. I mean, there's a couple things that I think we're starting to see. I think I'll start with the shutdown. The IRS told certain staff on Capitol Hill at a closed-door hearing recently that during the shutdown, they were receiving about 700,000 pieces of mail per week versus the usual 200,000 per week because the call centers were closed. So one, for those, there aren't many, but the 15% or so that still file their taxes with via the mail, e-file, because you'll get into the queue faster, it'll get processed faster. But that is one side effect. There's also 2,000 phone service employees whose training would have happened a month ago that now is just happening. So they're behind the curve. So, the call centers themselves are already behind. So that's a shutdown effect. I think we are seeing refund surprises so far in the high salt states. It's for the negative. One of the biggest things is that people did not adjust their withholding tables regarding the number of dependents that you have. You would have thought that when they eliminated the dependent as a part of the tax code, that your W-4 would have been wiped out and changed. That's not true. And so people who had 3, 4, 5 dependents, and it used to be $4,500 or $4,050 per dependent. So if you had 5, that's $20,000. All of a sudden, so you've been withholding on your biweekly or monthly paycheck based on those dependents, and all of a sudden that's gone. You get a tax bill when you go to file your taxes. And so we are seeing a lot of people surprised about that. I can even say in our own office, people who have gone in to file their taxes have already seen that surprise. The number one question we're actually getting is on the 20% pass-through rule, which is kind of interesting. People don't understand it, to your point about the lack of education. And then similarly with the changes to the child tax credit, the fact that they increased it to $2,000 from $1,400, the eligibility ceiling has been increased. There is kind of a lot of confusion about that. And just in terms of refunds, everyone kind of wants that, top line, headline. Are they up? Are they down? It's too soon to tell, but in the high salt states, the New Yorks, the California, Massachusetts, we are seeing that they're down, and actually fairly significantly.
Yeah. Thank you both. Yeah, so you both alluded to this. We had the new Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was passed at the end of 2017. People are finally seeing the first season where they're dealing with this. Let's talk a little bit about that bill. So any new tax law, there'd be complications, obviously the shutdown and the administration and issues. There are a few bright spots for low and moderate income families in it, but overall, there's also a lot of other missed opportunities and some perils as well, right, as we've just discussed. Elaine and Sam in particular, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your analysis of that. What happened when it comes to low and moderate income families? What were the bright spots? What were the challenges? What were the missed opportunities?
So I think the big story is that there wasn't a big change for low and middle income families. We passed a tax bill that bled the economy of $1.5 trillion, which is a big number. And low and middle income families were basically left out. The earned income tax credit was contracted just a little bit. It's going to grow a little bit more slowly over time. So you won't really see that this year or next year, but 10 years down the line, it starts to make a difference. Inflation matters. We saw what I think is sort of just incredibly clever. The headline was always the child tax credit was doubled, which is exciting, except no one bothered to mention sort of what the other folks are saying, that this other child benefit, the exemption, was just eliminated entirely. So there's a lot of things moving around and nothing changes. But I think the real thing that hits deep for me is that while a high-income child is worth $2,000, most of those taxpayers can get the full credit. Low-income families not only don't have enough income to have enough money to make it refundable for $2,000, they're actually capped at $1,400. So we persist in this system where those families who are most in need of assistance get the least assistance from the tax code. And what is particularly tragic is that it's so few families and they are so concentrated at the low end of the income spectrum that for just like $43 billion, which is nothing compared to that giant package, we could have extended the child tax credit to all families for $2,000.
So I want to flash back a little bit to tax reform. There was a remarkable moment, at least from my perspective. So I led a coalition trying to get more conservative groups to advocate for a larger child tax credit, recognizing that what was being proposed was essentially a bait and switch, just renaming deductions and exemptions in terms of a credit. The thing that stuck out for me was the utter resistance to doing anything on this. We have this idea of Trump as a populist president who's supposed to be working for the workers, but it's really been a populism of anti-populism. So like when Ted Cruz runs on abolishing the IRS, or Trump runs on working for the workers, but then passes basically the Chamber of Commerce version of a tax reform. They're using the populist rhetoric in an anti-populist way. So, I come from a conservative sort of libertarian world. People don't like the IRS. People don't like bureaucrats. People don't like auditors. But what they don't recognize is that if you defund the IRS, the people who are screwed are the people who turn to programs like VITA for support. The people who make off with millions are the tens of thousands of outstanding rich people who have back payments that they're avoiding, and or otherwise are just completely ignored by the tax system. We warned Republicans that we met with that if you don't do something more with the IRS, you're going to get this sticker shock. It was conventional wisdom when Bush did his tax cuts that you have to increase the refundability. And actually, they did something innovative. They did an advance payment of the child tax credit in the 2000s because they recognized that it's central to winning support for your other sort of more anti-populist measures. Instead, some of this sort of anti-government mentality is coming to bite them in the butt because the constraints that have been put on the IRS, we've missed hearings that would clarify a lot of guidance issues for a lot of the biggest parts of tax reform that are supposed to be pro-growth. Like that anti-government mentality, that pro-dysfunction mentality, is extremely toxic. And as someone who considers myself conservative, I think despite a lot of the rhetoric about AOC or the far left of the Democratic Party being utopian, there's an equally big chunk in the current Republican caucus that is equally utopian in the sense that they want to abolish the 16th Amendment. Forget fixing the IRS. They want to get rid of it, and that is as divergent from any conception of small c conservatism as you can get.
I'll just say, as a policy matter, we were Switzerland on that bill. We will remain Switzerland. We administer the code. We do not take positions on proposed legislation. I think that said, and this will be a theme I think throughout our discussion, and also you've heard it, the lack of education for people at the lower to middle income level. You know, if you are one of the speakers, you mentioned, you know, if you have more than $200,000, you may have an accountant, you may have financial advisors. You had a sit down and you were able to figure out, how would this affect me? How can I plan? For so many people, they just don't have that. And so much of how to help people with savings or planning, by the time they get to the tax desk, it's really too late. You know, they've got 30 minutes, 40 minutes, they're doing it themselves, they're in a VITA center. They don't have time to sit there and go through a litany of options and things and think of that trade-off. Most people have spent the money in their head already. And so I think, you know, we see this when it comes to refunds because, you know, you come in and you've mentally, if not physically, spent your refund already. And if you get that shock and you're used to $1,500, you know, coming to you, but your biweekly paycheck was adjusted $50, well, you add that up and all of a sudden that $1,500 could be $600, and that delta is a huge problem that causes people to seek alternative sources of capital that can, you know, put them at risk.
So add to that, you know, in the proposed legislation that you're talking about today, doubling the funding for VITA from 15 to 30 million, that's like a drop in the bucket. So like when the EITC was expanded under Clinton, it was done, part of the agreement, part of the bargain was that they would add $100 million to audit the EITC to prevent mispayments and so forth. That's a totally backward way of looking at it. If you have, most of the mispayments in EITC are done by mistake because it's incredibly complicated, especially if you have a large family of kids, you have confusing maybe parental custody arrangements, something like that. Funding programs like VITA, one for one, precludes the need for additional money to audit EITC recipients, because the reason they're making mistakes is because they're not getting support. And the fact that we spend 10 times as much trying to chase them down as we do trying to help tax filers makes no sense.
And another reason of the VITA programs being so important, though, is when persons do get that sticker shock and they do owe money, many times they won't file. That's where we get a lot of our low and moderate income people that just walk away and they don't file. Then they don't file for years sometime, and that compounds it, especially with the new collection issues that are going on. But when they come to this safe place of a VITA site, we can really help share with them, letting them know, you go ahead and file. We're going to file it electronically, and then you're going to work it out from there, because you're going to owe it in the long run. Don't compound the penalties and problems. But they don't have people giving them that type of direction and advice. They also, unfortunately, if they're going to a commercial preparer, there's no money to pay the tax preparation. So therefore, those folks don't really want our VITA clients, okay? We take them in whether they're getting refunds or whether they're owing money, and we also try to give them that good support of understanding their tax situation. And that's really, that education piece is so important.
So, I mean, I would add, we think VITA is a great program and fully support it. I think that I wish that all the EITC errors were just, you know, honest mistakes. I think one of the advantages of VITA, we'd say H&R Block, is we get it right more often than not. There is a fair amount of fraud because people have figured out kind of the optimization point of the credit, and they can underreport and over-report to maximize it. And while it's like a sugar high, it's good in the short run. In the long run, if you get caught or if there's a problem, you become ineligible for it for a certain number of years. And unfortunately, there is a lot of gaming that goes on, and we see it when people come in crying with letters because they've been audited. And so, you know, part of it too is trying to establish some quality set of standards so that people aren't taken advantage of, because if you're living on the edge and someone just dangles out in front of you, I guarantee you I can get you a $6,000 refund. You don't know how they're doing it because it's like a black box. Well, all of a sudden, when they spend the whole thing and they make $25,000, $30,000 a year, and the IRS knocks on their door a year later, they can't pay it back. I mean, and then it's like a death spiral.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've covered a lot of good terrain here in terms of policy and administration. So I'll pivot us to the administrative side. We've covered a lot of stuff here. The IRS itself, there was obviously, I think most people know, there was a couple competing proposals toward the end of the last Congress about reforming the IRS, which would include expanded funding and permanence for VITA, but also some more resources and restructuring for the IRS that was going on to deal with some of these issues. Obviously, the IRS has been starved for funds and is dealing with implementing the new tax law. We have the audit issues that are involved too. And obviously, there's a lot of interesting research and media that's come out about EITC recipients much more likely to be audited than higher income or moderate income taxpayers being targeted for that. What is the way forward as Congress is now sitting down, they're beginning to come back to the IRS reform bill? What are the things that what are your thoughts on the different proposals that were in the last Congress and your thoughts about like what do they need to be thinking about in this new proposal or in the old proposals, either modifying them or what they need to be thinking about moving forward to really address some of these issues and really make sure that low-income families are being taken care of? On top of that, we haven't even gotten into the PATH Act yet either, which is another huge impact when it comes to the EITC. But what are you all seeing and thinking are the most important factors given these challenges that we've discussed on the administration side?
So I think one issue is that audit rates for EITC recipients are roughly twice what they are for everyone else. That's shocking because these folks generally cannot pay the money back. So these are not what the IRS would really consider productive audits. It's not like going to a self-employed person who has hidden on average 40% of their income and trying to collect taxes on that. So the problems, it's not big dollars in terms of IRS audits, and it's also not likely to pay off. But they're still remarkably low. Like the chance of getting audited is very low for anyone. So it's not like half of people who get an EITC are getting some jackbooted thug knocking on their door asking for some cash. So I think the IRS, someone needs to step back at some point and figure out what's productive and what's not. So we know where people have difficulty complying with the tax law, and the IRS has wonderful studies on this, and they publish them, and we ought to follow the recommendations in those studies and go after folks who are really doing some high-dollar cheating that is damaging the whole system's ability to function.
Before getting to that, just to address the sort of the mispayment issue, the way you kind of in aggregate detect mispayment is the fact that there is this bunching around the plateau. So people report earnings that sort of optimize or refund. It's not obvious how much of that is actual misidentification of how much they've earned, or like strategically working a certain number of hours to maximize the refund. But that aside, wealthy people have tax accountants that do the exact same thing for them and optimize exactly how to shift their profits between, into LLCs and pass-throughs and offshore, and the dollar amounts are just vastly different, right? There's no money left on the table by actually going after EITC recipients. Not only that, but like the evidence around the EITC. The social policy evidence around it. One of the most striking facts that I like to talk about is, we think of the EITC as a workers credit, a family credit, but it also affects things like health, right? So there's in health economics you talk about like the cost and benefits of intervention. You talk about it in terms of a quality adjusted life year. So how much money do you spend to get one extra year of quality life? For the EITC, the estimates is that it's about $7,000 per quality. And Medicaid, it's $66,000. And we consider Medicaid cost effective because it extends people's lives and makes them healthier. But the EITC, which is just cash, is 8 or 9 times more powerful as a health policy intervention. So the fact that this is part of the problem in framing it as tax relief is if there are potential mispayments, we take that as a fraud analogous to misreporting your income, but it's that dollar that we're taking back from them is potentially leading to worse health, and this applies equally to the changes that have been made to the so-called integrity changes, adding Social Security checks to the child tax credit. First of all, that I found that very toxic from the point of view of the actual politics of expanding refundability, because no progressive organization wanted to touch the CTC in this tax reform after it was discovered that they were going to try to push out non-citizens. But second of all, like if we argue for the CTC on the basis of, or the EITC on the basis of, the positive health effects, the positive educational effects, the positive earning effects it has on children, those apply, equally to children, whether or not their parent is a green card holder, especially if the kid is a citizen but their parent isn't. So that to me is one area that has to be gone back to and looked at. From the administrative side, I'm a supporter of anything that can help low-income people prepare and file their taxes accurately and expeditiously. But I think legislatures need to start thinking bigger. Like, in the next 10, 20 years, all our houses are going to have fridges that order you milk automatically when you run out of it. And, myriad other things. We get mad when our Ubers are picking us up on the wrong corner. Like the longer technology advances in the sort of regular commercial realm, the more archaic this current tax refund system is going to look. If you look across, the ocean, you go to a country like Estonia, which is like at the far end of the spectrum, they are totally integrated with their electronic banking system. So if you are owed a transfer, you get it directly deposited in your bank account. It comes monthly, bi-weekly, whatever the case may be. Likewise for paying money and regulatory compliance. All that stuff is just being dramatically automated in other countries that are pursuing, not just EITC modernization, but just system modernization as a whole. So I think the long-term goal, as great as programs like VITA we shouldn't even need tax prep assistance. A lot of this stuff should just be utterly automated, especially when you're talking about paper, bits, dollars, and cents. These are things that software can handle really well and really automatically. So I think we need to be thinking bigger about modernizing the IRS overall and turning it into a 21st century technologically capable agency.
I think there's a lot of good points there. I think the fact that the IRS still runs on 1960s computers, and that's not a joke, is not good. I think the other thing is it is kind of a perverse mentality. Take the targeting scandal out. That's real. That inflamed a lot of passions on both sides of the aisle. The fact that the customer service isn't good, so I'm going to cut your budget more, is just hard. It's hard to run a business. There's bipartisan heads of the IRS have complained and begged for increased funding to modernize technology, to modernize other things. The only thing I would respectfully disagree about if the IRS were to kind of run your tax system and do it is on the earned income tax credit, they wouldn't know how many days of the year your child was with you. There are certain things that unless there's going to be an app that the government's going to track all of your expenses and track your life and track your child, I won't pass judgment. Again, we're Switzerland on that stuff. I can't see a lot of that working because we as a country have made a decision to run our social policy through the tax code. And that creates a lot of challenges as opposed to other countries around the world who have tried such systems. And I would also just add that we're talking about the IRS getting into the 19th, 20th century. Getting the IRS to that would be a challenge. And they've said so publicly.
When we're looking at what things can be improved where we are now, I'm at a community college, and we have We have a lot of adult students that are unable to get the earned income tax credit because they don't have children that may made a good decision at this time of their lives, but they don't get the benefit, even though they are working, they are low income, but they don't get the benefit of earned income tax credit. If they had children, they would. So I noticed that Senator Brown had brought that up, and I really hope that moves forward. In the state of Maryland, the legislators have made that adjustment and they want to increase it further. But it does provide benefit to these young working adults that are already experiencing a lot of financial problems. So I hope that is an area that our legislators will look at fully.
You know, I think you bring up a really interesting and important point, because 4 years ago, if we were sitting in this room, we had a situation where Speaker Ryan and President Obama were 100% consistent that we should have an expanded EITC for folks who did not have children at home. And I would have absolutely said we are at the right moment and we are going to fix this. And yet, we are not. We're still talking about it. So these are things that we have agreed on in the past, and we have had consensus from both sides of the aisle. The moving the age level down is just critical. I think we used to, when the childless EITC came into existence, there was this notion that we didn't want to make work too attractive because we wanted people to invest in themselves and go to school. So you don't make work too attractive so that people will go do that. Well, the bottom line is today, students are in community college and they are working. So we haven't made work unattractive so that people would choose education. We have made education so expensive that students must choose to both invest in themselves in education and work. So the rationale for why we put that 25-year limit in place just does not exist anymore.
Yeah.
Well, and the modern family structure has changed so much now that the number, the old it takes a village, theory, you have a lot of, where the teenage kids are taking care of, younger age children, or the parents are not there anymore and the grandparents are, there's just, and I don't have the right answer for that, but when you look at the ITC and actually getting it to the people who need that help the most, the old, family structure of a mom or a dad is really just, less and less the case. And designing whether it's expanding it or an additional, credit of some sort to address that reality and the strains that people face is real.
Yeah, these are some excellent points. Let's circle back to tax policy, the tax policy side. And, as we already discussed, to make administration easier, the tax code already, especially when it came to the ITC, was not simple. It was complex. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had two kind of stark aspects to it. It added complexity, right? And also, unlike, as Sam pointed out, unlike traditional tax cuts or, bills that provided benefits for everyone, regardless of what you thought about them, they actually provided some tangible benefits for lower and moderate income families. This bill really didn't. It was confusing because people were like, well, the standard deduction went up, but you lost the personal and dependency exemptions, and there was a child tax credit expansion, but it didn't go to there's a lot of confusion there. But the way it netted out, as we know from great research, is it didn't provide a lot of benefits for low and moderate income families. And other analysis showed that actually on a racial level as well, that it provided much greater benefits to white households than it did to households of color on top of that as well. So it's problematic on multiple levels. Now, flash forward, we have a new Congress, a divided Congress. We have lots of proposals out there that we've heard this morning and kind of touched on. There's also some competing interests too, though, because I think there's some attempts to undo or modify the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that Democrats or Republicans are on board with or not on board with, that some that would benefit low and moderate income families, some that wouldn't, that would actually increase the regressivity of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. All of you are involved in this in some form. What are your thoughts about what are the proposals out there, including the ones we discussed this morning and others, that really would make a difference for actually providing tangible benefits for these families and decreasing complexity to make it easier for people to file and get through the tax system itself?
We're Switzerland. Yeah. We do not have I would just, for the last 3 years, we heard our distinguished president say he was going to put us out of business. So we don't wade into that stuff.
So what I see is that people understand that folks are hurting. They're having difficulty making ends meet on multiple dimensions. And there's sort of a big recognition that those dimensions change depending on where you are. So I am from Kansas. When you experience being low income in Kansas, it might be about getting transportation to a job. When you are in New York City, it might be about paying for childcare. So needs are different, and communities know how to solve their problems. They just need the cash to do it. And I feel like the proposals that are out there are sort of taking two twists. One is double down on work. So we will make work pay by increasing tax credits. If companies won't pay their workers, we'll sort of do it through the back end of the tax system. And then there's sort of the other side, which is let's look at children in poverty, maybe even very young children, where we can get the biggest bang for our buck and deliver money either to kids or to workers. And all of them seem to be sort of what Representative Watson-Coleman was talking about. We're talking about, instead of what's practical and what we think can pass, but what is needed and what is our responsibility. And I thought that was a really nice framing. So there's these huge proposals out there, many of which have been listed. And I think the characteristics I like about them are when we separate work and children. So the EITC gets tangled up in figuring out where kids live and making sure that kid is just in the exact right spot, even though we know households are complicated and children are moving between houses, sometimes just between two parents even. So I like when Harris puts out a bill that is like, single people get this much money, married people get this much money, and there's not a whole lot of dickering around with where these kids are spending each night. And then I also, appreciate the proposals when Bennett and Brown put forth something for children and they say, let's give that extra boost to very young children, because we know families with young children have unique needs and they are more likely to be in poverty than families with older children. And those early dollars give a lifetime of benefits to these kids. Those are the health outcomes and the education outcomes that have already been talked about.
Building off what Elaine mentioned about sort of the opportune moment that when we had a Ryan Congress and an Obama White House, and Ryan being the fresh face of conservative poverty policy, right? I think in the end it was revealed that was all a bit of a fig leaf. On the floor of the Senate when tax reform was being passed, Rubio put forth an amendment that would have got first dollar refundability to the child tax credit and brought the refundable portion of it up to the full $2,000, and in exchange for a percentage point increase to the corporate tax rate. So 21% instead of 20%, and that the revolt that caused when analytically, like getting first dollar refundability of the child tax credit is sort of not much different than increasing the earned income tax credit, but no, there was no appetite for that whatsoever, and in the end they gave him the most de minimis increase that they could afford. Looking forward, speaking as someone from the right of center, I've been making the case for 2 years now about why conservatives of all people should, favor something like the American Family Act, which is a fully refundable child allowance. We talk a lot these days with these big ideas that are coming out in the sort of the ideas primary. Can we be like Denmark or Sweden? I say let's get to Canada first. And then we'll move from there. And in Canada, they have something called the Canada Child Benefit, which it's gone up a bit since it's inflation adjusted. But initially, it was $6,400 per young kid, $5,400 per adolescent, and fully refundable. So if you had two kids under the age of 6, and you had very minimal earnings, you'd be looking at nearly $13,000 in credits. It's cut their child poverty rate in half. The Brown-Bennett bill is sort of smartly calibrated to do the exact same thing, to cut child poverty in America in half. Poverty appeals to a more progressive sort of priority set, but everything we know from what in sociology is called the family systems theory is that past expansion to the CTC and EITC and increases in child benefits in other countries lead to better household stability, lead to better family stability, less divorce. Right now, Virginia's on fire over an abortion debate, which it's so silly because it's not like governors are on the Supreme Court, but within the evangelical community and having formed coalitions with them in the past on the child tax credit, there's a broad recognition that giving income support to new mothers reduces the likelihood of late-term abortions, increases the health and well-being of the child. Like the conservative case for this, the pro-family case for this is, I think, airtight. It's because despite this populist moment, the party has never been more Wall Street Journal editorial board. So there's that paradox to resolve. But if there's ever a chance for some realignment to take place, something like the American Family Act, I think, could actually peel off some votes and be partially bipartisan. To the extent that there are moderate pro-family Republicans that are smart about these issues.
I mean, I'll add one part on the tax administration side. I mentioned before, the fact that there are no standards to be a tax preparer continues to be just a bad thing. We have long advocated that there should be some basic minimum standards. And I think in addition to that, or perhaps along with it, when you file taxes, a tax preparer has what's called a personal tax identification number, a PTIN, and there's a certain set of actions that the IRS is supposed to do, criminal background check and make sure that you're compliant with your taxes. And they do it after they grant you the PTIN, and even then it's just kind of random, and you self-attest that you're not a criminal. I mean, and then no one really does anything with it. And so, you talk about the 21st century, algorithm and software that would immediately check this and then make the decision to grant you the PTIN. And even worse, you can file taxes with an expired PTIN. So even once you get it, if it's expired, you are no longer valid, IRS computer systems keep accepting it. So just small administration things. We're going to be tax nerds. We'll really lean into the administration side.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. When we think about paid taxpayer regulations, the IRS attempted to put regulations out there in some form. They're struck down. There's been relatively bipartisan support for the idea, at least in the past, in the Senate, to advance some type of form of regulations that would be similar to what the IRS put forward to actually put that in a statute. So we have a situation now in the field where you have these challenges. You don't have really strong regulation. You have VITA, right, as a resource. You have institutions that do actually train the preparers and have some standards, but you have a large swath. The majority of people getting the EITC are going to paid preparers. So when we talk about error rates and the EITC, these are the people who are preparing it either because they're not trained properly or they're intentionally gaming the system to kind of jump the refunds up for folks. Think about beyond the policy side, but think about these challenges at tax time. You have unregulated preparers. We heard the announcement yesterday that the CFPB is going to basically take out the heart of their payday rule, the main part of it, which was to evaluate the ability of people to repay the loan before you give them a loan, which seems like common sense that you shouldn't give a loan to someone unless you know they can repay it, unless you're trying to put them into a debt trap of some type. On top of that, you have a bunch of specific products, right, at tax time, refund anticipation loans, RACs, like different, depending on what provider you go to, it could come with a variety of traps, and there's not a lot of guidance for low-income families in how to navigate this. When it comes to these challenges or others, what are you all seeing as both the solutions, but also other types of challenges in in this same realm and how to best deal with it in this tax season and beyond, ideally.
And I'll speak first from the ground. It's really about education. And it's when we come, even if someone is not going to come back to us, say next year, hopefully they're outside of our income level, and we really applaud that. But regardless, people move around, so they may not come back. We try to also educate them on what they should expect from a preparer so that they can make good decisions. We're not trying to get everyone just to come to us. We really try to empower them, some to do their own tax returns using our software that's made available, or use other opportunities. But they have to know when something is wrong. Don't just go on a dollar amount, which is what most of our clients, someone said, if you're going to give me $6,000, wow, I got it. Right. But they don't look at the return even to see what's on there. When we are working with some prior year information, we'll say, oh, you had a business last year. No, I didn't have a business. Well, it says you had a business here. People don't even know that. I hate to say it, but the new tax forms have made it impossible almost to even explain. When I'm training our preparers, I say one of the things that makes us different is people will not leave us unless they understand their tax return. But now with this so-called postcard 1040, which all they did was take the full 1040 and break it into a bunch more schedules that people now will lose completely.
I have no comment on that.
And we still have some seniors trying to do manual tax returns, and that's going to be a disaster further. But we try to make sure they understand what's going on that return so that when someone tries to add income or put something on there, they know to question the numbers and they know the key numbers because you can't understand everything. So we find education is something we can do to at least help support our community as they move forward.
I mean, I'll just say on that note, like, and I'm being serious here, I'm very proud of this. This year, we made the decision to actually become totally upfront and transparent on all of our pricing. Mm-hmm. And one of the, tax prep is one of the few things, along with maybe healthcare, where you go through an entire process and you have no idea what you're going to pay. And then when they give you a bill, you have no idea why it is, right? And you just shrug your shoulders and pay it. Right? And, you've done your taxes for an hour. You're not going to walk away, most people, and go do it again. And when you walk into the next place, you don't know what it's going to cost. We completely changed that. Everything is up front. Everything is in front of you. To your point, you will now know exactly why your bill is what it is, which credit, which deduction, everything online and in retail. Because to your point, education is key. The other thing I would add is, we talk about the PATH Act. Again, I'm not going to comment on whether it was a good idea or bad idea, but to say that people's need for cash is so great. We used to offer a refund advance loan that, was criticized. We got out of the industry as most preparers did. What we saw, though, was the demand for that short-term capital never disappeared and, in fact, probably increased. And people will go hunting for access to those refunds. And I understand the integrity reasons for the PATH Act to try to match up against the W-2s, to try to, reduce fraud, improper payments. But the result is by delaying the refund of an EITC filer for, 3 weeks or so, when these are people who they come in the first 2 days of season because they need that refund to meet the February 5th rent payment. And by stretching it out, they will go and rather than waiting for a refund of $6,000 or $5,000 in 3 weeks, they will go to a payday lender, get $1,000 and give them the other $5,000 because they don't have a choice, right? We got back in the market with a loan that is interest-free, fee-free, and recourse-free. And people are like, yeah, but you're not the church. Why did you do it? We paid the bank the issuance fee. From a competitive standpoint, people were going and still will hunt for access to that capital. And it is a huge issue. It's just the reality of the world. And I don't, have good answers for it. But, it's out there.
And I think from a policy standpoint, when Senator Brown was also speaking about the idea of advancing people's EITC, and I always said, if people could get loans but from good places, but this is like your own money. And I think if there's any way that that can move forward, that's just something I believe we should get behind. And hopefully that will stop them from going, because in Maryland, we have eliminated payday lending because of controlling the interest rate of it. But people still go across to Virginia. They're out there still doing it. So you're right, they will seek it out. Let's get some safe ways for lower income people to have access to funds.
I mean, even worse, when you try to drive out the payday lenders, they go off the books. I mean, to very unscrupulous characters, because you're driving out the supply, but JP Morgan's not going to come in and loan them $300 for 4 weeks, and Wells Fargo's not going to do that. Fintech may play a role in that in the future, but I'm not going to there's a whole set of issues there, but it is a problem. It is a real problem.
Yeah. Sam, go ahead.
Oh, sure. There's different approaches. So there's just clearly this credit market failure at the low end of the sort of high risk borrowing segment of the population. My libertarian friends will talk endlessly about why we shouldn't regulate payday loans because there are emergency scenarios where it makes sense. I kind of actually agree with them, but the point is the way you solve that market failure then is through the spending side, right? When in states they expanded Medicaid, a recent study found that use of payday loans declined by almost 50%. So people were actually using short-term borrowing to fund medical expenditures, and so getting to something more periodic, I think, is probably a number one priority. And if we move to something like a child allowance, like the Brown-Bennett American Family Act, it would be a new capacity for the IRS to do something like that, but it should be much simpler than doing a periodic EITC, because if it's fully refundable, it's a matter of counting the number of kids you have, and most people know how many kids they have.
Yeah, let's so a lot of good points covered here, and there's a lot of exciting kind of innovations and research that are going on to get at this problem, whether it's a periodic EITC, the idea there's different types of for-profit services, fintech services about allowing you to it comes down to the definition of borrow, but take money in advance out of your paycheck. There's also proposals like, as was mentioned this morning, the refund of rainy day savings proposal, which would kind of incentivize and help people save a portion of the refund when they receive it, so they have it for an emergency or later in the year, 6 months down the road. What are our thoughts on these innovations or others, and what does the research show, as much as we have research for some of these things, about what's effective, how does it meet consumer preferences, how does it impact the bottom line?
So I feel like the legislation sort of goes in mostly one direction right now, where people are saying we need to pay payouts monthly. I actually have some concerns with that. I think it's good to get people money as quickly as you can, but what I worry about is people sort of have an ability to carry around a certain amount of debt, and they do that knowing that when their tax time comes, they will be able to relieve themselves of that burden. And so if we allow money to just trickle into paychecks, we'll see what happened with the Making Work Pay credit. People will spend it. Maybe standard of living will rise. That's all good. But if they then get hit with this surprise that they don't get a refund, it could put people in a very vulnerable situation. So some work I did with Donald Marin on a carbon dividend, which is, of course, different, but we talked about what's the best way to get people money when they need it, but not have it result in some trap. And I think we're a little bit settled on this notion of quarterly payments, and that's what they tested in Chicago. So the idea is every quarter you'll get a quarter of your EITC or some share of it, and hopefully that's infrequent enough that you don't just absorb it into your budget function, but it's frequent enough that you can avoid all these sort of debt traps people are talking about. Like you can catch a hardship on your rent just quickly before it spirals out of control. You can handle the medical crisis before you have to go to the payday lender. So I'm sort of the mind that I would like to see these distributed sort of in a quarterly fashion. And then I think it is essential that if we do it on the EITC side instead of the child credit side, there has to be some sort of safe harbor provision for families who tip just outside of eligibility. They will not have the money to pay it back. So there's got to be some corrective measure that allows people to make mistakes. Now, the child credit side, I agree with you, is a lot more fruitful path because it extends so far up the income distribution. I'm not particularly concerned with a $200,000 earning family when they earn $240,000 one year and lose their child tax credit. I think they will be able to handle that on their tax bill. I am very concerned about the $30,000 earner who moves into $45,000, maybe because they get married and someone joins the tax unit. So that's sort of my couching around. I like the advance idea. It's contemporaneous with need, but we have to be very cautious when we go this route.
I mean, our research shows that people like that to your point about education and learning, you know, we've looked at stuff a lot, and our research has always shown people like getting a refund. Like, they just like getting that lump. And, you know, look, there's the myth that they go spend it on Nikes and, you know, at Best Buy, but that's often not the case. But I mean, you know, we're agnostic as to how it happens, but that's what our research has always shown us, that they don't like being told.
So I think that research is true, but I think it didn't have an opportunity when it was done to sort of understand what a periodic payment would mean. And so we've sort of advanced since then, right?
Yeah.
We've had the New York City demonstration, we've had the Chicago demonstration, there's now sort of little basic income things going on, and people are walking out of these programs saying, that was fantastic to get my refund or my EITC as I needed it throughout the year. So I don't think it's everyone would move to some quarterly or monthly payment, but I think there are some people who could be enticed into doing it and maybe live a more stable life. The amount of income volatility people experience is shocking, and it's not just from, I lost my job. I think the U.S. Financial Diaries reports did such an elegant job of pointing out sometimes you hold the same job and your hours are so flexible. So I am a truck mechanic. In the summer, tires burn out. I work a lot, okay? When the winter, tires don't burn out. Engine problems don't happen quite so often, so now my hours are cut to very minimal throughout the year. So I'm holding the same skilled position, but the nature of the business that I'm in causes it to be very surprising.
And also, when you mention about people and refunds, all of our clients, on the day they're having their taxes done, they want their refund. I mean, and we've participated in various tax time savings and various, talking about it at the time they're getting a refund, you're almost just like spending a lot of time and it's not going to have great effect. We get very few people to say, now I'm going to save. The key is our clients don't have those planners prepared. They don't have people that are helping them throughout the year. So we need more opportunities for our clients to really have that access of information, support, counseling, guidance. That's why coaching sometimes is so effective, done outside of the tax experience. I'm not saying you're going to get 100%, but you will get more take up if someone is talking to you after tax season and planning for next year. Isn't that how most of us, we try to plan our financial situations? So I hope that we can have more opportunities and more, for example, financial empowerment centers. We have one at our college where people can come in and they have their own tax coaches. They have financial coaches. That's where they can make those kind of decisions more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have it on me, but we did a 3-year pilot with CFPB on savings to encourage. And if I recall, I think 500,000 people were targeted. I think 300 took it up. The CFPB would match, like it was like $5 for a rainy day fund of some sort. And every single one of those people took it out within 30 days. I mean, you're talking about people who live very close to the edge, as we're all discussing here. And so, getting them money at other times, but it's the behavioral lessons they'd have to learn, to change and educate people, would be real.
Great. Yeah, so one final question for the panel focused on research issues, and then we'll open it up to you all, so start thinking of your questions. But so we covered a lot of great stuff here, talking about these different innovations, talking about volatility, talking about what we know and what we don't know. Sam, you've hit on this a lot about general research around the EITC and its benefits around health and children and families in general. For all of you, it'd be great to hear either some research or experience about lately or that's upcoming that kind of touches on or talks about how the impact of tax time or anything related to tax time benefits families. One thing in particular, Andrea mentioned this earlier, is thinking about volatility and how it drives people to products and services, good and bad, right, and all that have trade-offs. We are engaging in really exciting new research project that we're going to be starting this year that'll focus on next tax season, but we'll be looking both at this year and next year and looking at the usage of financial products and services by low-income families, a variety of products and services and how they're using them. This is research that we at least do not know of anything that's at this level that's been done out there, and we're really looking forward to kind of digging deeper into this, understanding it through a variety of different services, whether it's volunteer or private, kind of seeing the experience of these families when they are desperate and they want this money, they want the refund right away. Where are they going? What are they using? And obviously credit would be a big part of that, but other types of services as well to manage their financial lives and to try to get to the heart of that. So I'll go to Dan first to let him talk a little bit more about this, anything that he wants to comment on it, but then after that we can talk about this research in general and would love to hear people's thoughts before we open it up to general Q&A.
Yeah, I just think we're really proud and excited to partner on this. We just think there's so much talk out there on this issue, but very little facts and understanding. Kathy Eaton, others have kind of, their work gets put out there. And I think there's a lot of interesting ideas. And I think we're just really fascinated to see, to follow people's lives, to see what happens is just something that we're really, fascinated to bring to the policy debate.
So at the Tax Policy Center, we are grateful for all the work that everyone else at the table does that tells us how things really matter in people's lives. So our bread and butter is letting you know how much a piece of legislation is going to cost and who those dollars are going to be distributed in. And then I count on folks like you to tell me if people get $1,000 extra, what does it mean in their lives? And for that, I am extremely grateful.
In terms of research, coming back to like the value of periodic payments, there's been some really interesting stuff that not necessarily on the EITC, but has some applicability. So there's a new MBER paper showing that use of the National School Lunch Program increases near the end of the month for SNAP families. There's also been sort of the flip side of that research showing that petty crime at grocery stores increases near the end of the month. Yeah. So talking about periodicity, there's a debate that something like the EITC sort of functions as a forced savings mechanism. The fact that people end up using a large chunk of it to pay down credit card debt is I think evidence against that. Setting aside the fact that that's a kind of paternalistic way of framing the program. I want to see more periodic, like maybe a month isn't even periodic enough. Like there's proposals out there that are far outside the capabilities of today's IRS, but to do it biweekly or on every paycheck, and those kind of solutions I think would really help smooth the income volatility over the year, and in a way that has benefits to the individual, but also to society.
Okay. And if I could just, one additional piece
Of course,
is about savings. And having policies that help support savings. This year or last 2 years ago, we saw where IDAs were eliminated, basically, and that changed the face of many communities. Some organizations stepped in and are still trying to support that. But if you're bringing money in and you're trying to encourage people, matching savings is a wonderful way to do that, and especially for children accounts, it's essential. The research has said that if children have these accounts, they do progress better. They are more functional as they get older. So I would like to see our tax policy somehow take advantage of the idea of match savings also.
Absolutely, and especially with match savings, we know, the match incentivizes, but also facilitating it in a behaviorally informed way, making it easy for people to do it right at tax time. When you have that lump sum, being able to put a little bit aside. We've also done research in other areas, speaking of forced savings, with payroll deduction, we've done work looking at retirement accounts and creating these pockets, these emergency savings pockets with it. We're doing working with Prudential on a great project right now, looking at about like how when people are getting their paychecks and people who are either already saving for retirement or maybe not saving for retirement because they can't meet their immediate needs and they're like, I can't deal with the retirement. What's a way to actually use payroll deduction, the most powerful, for those who have it available to them, the most powerful mechanism for forced savings, to kind of put it into an emergency pocket that they can use, that they can later pull out penalty-free if they have an emergency, versus retirement savings where you may not even be able to think about that, or if you do, you pay some pretty steep penalties if you pull that money out under the wrong circumstances. So tax time and when thinking about savings in the workplace are two really exciting areas to think about savings and how we can do that in a way that can help smooth volatility. So great. So thank you to the panel for these comments so far. So now we want to open it up to you all for your questions based on all the various content that we've covered here and anything that we've missed.
Hi, I'm Anna Aurelia. I work with the Economic Security Project. Thank you all for doing this. One thing that's been particularly troubling to us is the plight of students, right? We've heard about wage stagnation. One of the things in life that's gone up even more dramatically is the cost of higher education, and students are homeless. They can't meet their monthly bills. So we're strongly supporting Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman's EITC modernization to not just lower the eligible age and make it monthly, but also to extend eligibility to low-income students. So I'd love to hear what you think about that.
So I think the notion is really interesting. We have a system that supports work, but we've defined work in a very traditional, sort of dated way, I would suggest. And so I think the ideas that your group and Watson-Coleman are presenting are sort of more in line with what we think of as work now. So education, it certainly falls under the rubric of doing something that's hard and valuable to society, and also the caregiver piece. So thinking about, I have a young child or an aging parent that I need to care for, why shouldn't that also count as work? It does benefit society as a whole. I'm not leaving my 3-year-old running around in the parking lot. I'm taking care of him or her. So I think that expanded definition of work is more in line with what we think of as appropriate and things we want to, like good behaviors we want to incentivize in the tax system.
I think this actually goes to one of the reasons why, like in a country like Canada, conservatives were the ones that pushed through a child allowance, recognizing that, today we have a Republican Party that's trying to struggle how they're going to ever reach out to immigrants and working class communities, given that they're never going to have a repeat of 2016. In Canada, the Conservative Party owns a large market share of the immigrant vote, and partly it's because they recognize that in more traditional families, there are stay-at-home parents that, in the U.S. context, over, I think, 34% of kids are cared for by a stay-at-home parent, and I think something like 60% rely on predominantly relatives and family. We're not all college-educated workers in a metropolitan area using childcare centers. In fact, it's not all of us. There's a majority of people relying on family. Moving to something like a child allowance would help compensate that home production. My worry is that that's a simple way of doing it. My worry is that there are other ways of doing it where we actually end up increasing the administrative complexity of the EITC, where you have to, somehow demonstrate that you are a home care provider, and it's as if we're like paying you on an invisible wage schedule that you don't have. I would rather just give parents money to use how they want.
Any other questions? If there are not any other questions, what I'll do is just give each of the panelists a chance to kind of make any final remarks before we wrap up.
I just thank you guys for doing this. Thank you to all the panelists. Thanks to everyone who came. I think this is a great conversation, and there's going to be a lot more of it in the next 2 years. And I think that getting people who are in the trenches, who study this, who focus on it, is really healthy for the conversation.
I think I want to add to earlier comments that the big ideas we're seeing now, even if we don't think they can be passed today or tomorrow, they are productive in that they highlight what the issues people are facing are, and they bring the importance. And in economics, we talk about this Overton window. And so these are the things that are possible. And as you talk about big and bold policies that seem impossible today, you expand people's thinking about what is possible. And so we shouldn't give up on big ideas because they're hard. We should think of them as goalposts that we are moving in the direction that folks prefer.
First of all, thank you for having me. This has been really fun. I want to leave you with just the thought that, moving the Overton window is really powerful. But at the end of the day, there are 2 chambers of Congress and an electoral college and all the other things that mean we're not going to have single-payer health care anytime soon. So what that suggests is if you're a progressive person, a liberal person who shares the goal of expanding the earned income tax credit or the child tax credit from a point of view of social justice or economic justice, that you retain those beliefs, but also think about how you can broaden the motivations behind this to enlarge the camp of people and make the argument for increased refundable credits in a way that appeals across the board, and don't just go to your usual representatives over and over again to put forward legislation that ends up being for messaging. Think long term about how you can build the case with potential odd bedfellows, and I think that's the way in our polarized times any of this change is gonna come. So.
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me here. I have enjoyed it. It has been fun. And also, just as you're working in policy, working in legislation, please keep in mind that there's real people behind this. There are families that are hurting. There are families that can do some wonderful things. They just need support. And they are working hard. And that, just like EITC, it's not about a handout. If truthfully all of these people were making appropriate incomes, we'd have no EITC. And so just keep that in mind, these real pictures, these real families behind it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I don't know if we can put it much better than that. Thank you, Betty, and the rest of our panelists, and thank you all for joining us. Yeah.
So we've done a lot of panels at Prosperity Now, and we have very high standards. But rarely have I seen a panel of all the voices come together from a range of perspectives more fluidly and with greater insight than I just heard from our 4 panelists. And never, may I say, have I agreed so many times with a libertarian. And to me, that is really good news. So with that, please join me in thanking a truly extraordinary panel. So in closing, I want to go back to the 20th century, to a woman named Frances Perkins. How many of the millennials know who she is? Yay, all right? So she was the first woman secretary of any job, but of labor. And my dear friend Ellen Lazar gave me an extraordinary biography of her called The Woman Behind the New Deal, which really traces how all the progressive policy infrastructure that was created in the 20th century began with her. And it began when child labor of children working at ages 6 and 7 was normal, and anything to stop it was opposed. And it began with her sitting in the cabinet room in the early days of the Roosevelt administration with her fellow cabinet members, all men, who had absolutely no idea how to talk when there was a woman in the room. And she understood this, so she actually said nothing. And the framing of this was, when the word sexism was not even invented, how do you play along so you can get things done? And what's fascinating about that book, which I think goes to what Elaine said today, is that you have to have the vision of what needs to happen, and you have to bring the insights. I mean, the benefits we have, as I was listening to all the insights here, the benefits we have of so much research and knowledge about what is true in people's lives, as we heard so powerfully from Betty, and what the implications are and how those are changing. You know, I began thinking of Jacob Packer's great book on the Great Risk Shift and all the financial risk that's now at the household level that used to be institutional. And then when I was thinking of Senator Brown, I was thinking of the book Scarcity. If you haven't read this book, you need to read it, Why Having So Little Matters So Much. What it talks about, the extraordinary ingenuity that people who are very low income have to have just to get through day by day. But then I was thinking about how the whole way we've built out an infrastructure for financial capability is really behind what makes all of this work. The EITC and our need to expand the EITC and other tax benefits that reflect how the household and families are restructured and how the whole nature of work/school has restructured, then helps us think through this all can't be done just through a tax credit, that it needs to be part of a broad infrastructure that includes the kind of financial coaching, infrastructure of savings products and high-quality credit products, and match savings, which are incredibly important, and the educational resources that enable people to take advantage of it. So I really want to say that this conversation takes place within a infrastructure that we have all been collectively building for not that long, really no more than 2 decades, and is an infrastructure that we all need to be working on together to figure out the next iteration of where it moves. And the idea that my refrigerator is going to order my milk is absolutely astonishing. So with that, I just want to thank all of you for attending and all of you for the incredible work you do. To thank Lauren, our partners at Tax Credit for Workers and their families, to thank H&R Block for the wonderful partnership, to thank Senator Brown's office, who arranged all the logistics with the room and the space and everything like that, and our extraordinary panelists who bring their passion, their commitment, their knowledge, and our wonderful facilitator over here in David. So with that, keep up your great work. Let's keep working together and have a wonderful day.